The desert remembers what empires try to forget. Long after banners rot and marble cracks, the sand still whispers names Rome never wanted spoken again. One of those names rises with the heat at dawn: Zenobia. She did not begin as a conqueror, she began as a shadow. In the 3rd century, the Roman world was splintering, emperors murdered, borders collapsing, legions stretched thin. Far from Rome's marble halls, in the eastern sands, stood Palmyra, a wealthy oasis city balancing trade routes like a blade. Rome called it loyal. Rome called it obedient. Rome was wrong. Zenobia watched from behind veils of silk and protocol, listening while men spoke as if she were invisible. She memorized their fears, their numbers, their arrogance. Her husband, Odenathus, ruled Palmyra in Rome's name, defending the east against Persian invasion. He was strong, he was respected, and then, suddenly, he was dead, his blood soaking into the same empire he had protected. Rome expected grief. They expected weakness. They expected a widow to step aside. Instead, Zenobia stepped forward. She ruled not as a regent hiding behind a child king, but as a force. She wrapped herself in the language of Rome while quietly severing its grip. Coins still bore the emperor's face at first. Official letters still spoke of loyalty at first. But beneath the surface, Zenobia was building something dangerous. She expanded Palmyra's army. She secured Egypt, the grain lifeline of Rome itself. She took Syria, Arabia, Anatolia, not with chaos, with precision. She studied philosophy and military history. She spoke multiple languages. She surrounded herself with generals who respected her mind, not just her crown. Roman sources later sneered at her ambition, called her arrogant, unnatural, because a woman commanding legions broke their worldview. And yet, city after city opened its gates. Zenobia did not burn Rome's banners, she simply replaced them. By the time Rome realized the East had slipped from its grasp, it was already too late. The empire was fighting itself, usurpers, invasions, famine. In that weakness, Zenobia declared what Rome feared most: independence. Not rebellion, a rival empire. She styled herself Augusta, equal to emperors. She traced her lineage to Cleopatra, daring Rome to remember the last queen who humiliated them. For a brief, electrifying moment, the East was no longer Rome's shadow, it was its mirror. If this story feels like it's building towards something inevitable, stay with it. Histories like this only survive because people choose to remember them. Rome could not allow this to stand, and so the empire sent one man to erase her: Aurelian. Steel moved east. The legions returned, disciplined and merciless. Zenobia met them not with panic, but preparation. She rode with her troops. She spoke to them directly. She promised them a future that did not bow to distant rulers who had never walked their streets. The desert watched again, because empires fall loudly, but resistance often dies quietly. As the Roman war machine closed in, Zenobia made one final calculation, one that would decide whether she would be remembered as a queen or rewritten as a footnote. The sand holds its breath here, and what comes next will decide whether her name survives at all. Rome does not forgive, it remembers. And when it finally turns its full attention toward an enemy, it does so with iron patience. Aurelian did not rage when he heard Zenobia's name spoken in the Senate. He did not shout, he did not boast, he simply prepared.
He was a soldier emperor, raised not in marble corridors, but in camps that smelled of sweat and blood. He understood something Rome had forgotten. Empires are not saved by pride, but by speed. While Zenobia consolidated her eastern realm, Aurelian stabilized the west with brutal efficiency. Usurpers fell, borders hardened, legions regrouped. Only when Rome was whole again did he turn east, marching with the cold certainty of a man who intends to leave nothing standing behind him. The road to Palmyra was long and deliberately destructive. City after city faced a choice: open the gates and live, or resist and be erased. Aurelian made examples early. One defiant city burned so completely that its ruins were left unburied, a warning carved into the earth. News traveled faster than legions ever could. Zenobia heard everything. She knew Aurelian was not like the fractured emperors before him. She knew this was not a punitive expedition. This was extermination wrapped in order. And yet she did not retreat into the desert. She did not hide behind walls. She advanced. Her forces met Rome near Antioch. The battlefield was wide and unforgiving, perfect for Rome's heavy infantry, and Zenobia knew it. She allowed her cavalry to strike first, fast and sharp, harassing Roman flanks before withdrawing. The Romans pursued. That was the trap. Her horsemen turned, encircling the stretched legions, cutting deep. For a moment it worked. Aurelian watched calmly. Then he did something unexpected. He ordered a controlled retreat, measured, disciplined, deliberate. Zenobia's cavalry followed, sensing collapse. They pushed harder, faster, farther. Too far. The Roman line snapped back into place like a steel jaw. Fresh legions surged forward. The Palmyrene cavalry, exhausted and overextended, broke. Antioch fell, not with a scream, but with a dull, final thud. Zenobia withdrew again, refusing panic. She regrouped at Emesa, gathering what remained of her forces, rallying them beneath banners that still promised independence. She rode among them, armored, visible, not a distant queen, a living symbol. But Rome was relentless. At Emesa, the desert itself seemed to turn against her. Dust blinded men, horses collapsed, supplies thinned. When the legions struck again, they struck at the heart. Zenobia's army shattered, not from cowardice, but from inevitability. Palmyra stood alone now. Behind its walls waited wealth Rome coveted, and a queen Rome could not tolerate. Zenobia retreated there, sealing the gates, buying time with stone and stubborn will. She sent envoys east, seeking Persian aid that never came. She rationed supplies. She calculated escape routes. Night after night, fires burned on the horizon, Roman camps tightening the noose. If you're still listening, remember this moment. This is where legends stop being written by victors and start being hunted, because Zenobia still believed she could outrun Rome. She was wrong, and the desert was about to decide her fate.
Palmyra did not fall in a single night. It withered. The siege tightened day by day, not with reckless assault, but with patience that felt almost cruel. Aurelian understood cities better than walls did. He starved Palmyra's confidence first, then its people. Trade stopped, wells ran low. The great oasis, once loud with merchants and caravans, fell into an uneasy silence,
broken only by Roman horns at dawn. From the palace terraces, Zenobia watched the desert change color with the light. She did not weep. Queens did not survive by mourning, they survived by moving. She knew Palmyra could not hold forever. Rome controlled the roads. Persian aid had evaporated into excuses. Her generals spoke in careful tones now, weighing survival instead of victory. Zenobia listened. Then she made her final decision, not surrender, but escape. At night, beneath a moonless sky, she mounted a camel and slipped through the eastern gate with a small escort. The plan was desperate but calculated. Ride hard toward the Euphrates, cross into Persian territory, and regroup. Empires had been rebuilt from less. But Rome had learned her mind. Aurelian had anticipated the attempt. Cavalry shadows moved faster than camels ever could. By dawn, Zenobia was surrounded, dust rising around her like a curtain falling on a stage. She did not fight. She stood straight when they brought her before Aurelian, dust-covered, exhausted, still unmistakably a queen. Roman sources later tried to humiliate her, claiming arrogance, madness, vanity. But even they could not erase this detail. She spoke calmly, clearly, without begging. She argued that she had ruled as Rome itself once had, protecting borders, stabilizing chaos, commanding loyalty. She reminded him that many emperors had done far worse and been praised for it. Aurelian listened, and then he ordered her taken alive. Palmyra surrendered soon after. Its gates opened not in flames, but in silence. Rome occupied the city carefully, almost respectfully at first. Aurelian spared it, issuing a proclamation of mercy. He wanted the East to see him as restorer, not destroyer. Zenobia was transported west under heavy guard, not in chains meant for slaves, but restraints meant for symbols. Rome did not yet know what to do with her. Along the road, people gathered to watch her pass. Some stared in awe, others in fear. A woman who had stood toe-to-toe with Rome was not supposed to exist. Her very presence cracked the story Rome told about itself. If stories like this matter to you, the ones history tries to smooth over, this is where staying with them matters most. In Rome, whispers followed her arrival. Should she be executed, paraded, forgotten? Aurelian hesitated, and that hesitation would prove costly. Because Palmyra was not finished. While Zenobia waited in captivity, her city revolted. Roman administrators were killed, banners rose again, the desert refused to stay quiet. This time, Aurelian did not negotiate. He returned east with fury sharpened by betrayal. Palmyra was crushed completely, its temples burned, its people slaughtered, its name reduced to a warning. The oasis that once rivaled Rome was turned into a scar. Zenobia never saw it again, and Rome believed the problem solved. But they underestimated one thing: the power of a defeated queen to haunt an empire that feared her legacy more than her armies. Because Zenobia was still alive, and Rome had one last decision to make.
Rome had no script for a woman like Zenobia. She was not a barbarian captive dragged in silence. She was educated, composed, and painfully aware that every eye in the capital measured her not as a prisoner, but as a question. What do you do with a queen who dared to rule as Rome ruled? For months she waited, not in a dungeon, but under guarded confinement,
comfortable enough to avoid pity, controlled enough to prevent legend. Senators debated her fate in hushed corridors. Some demanded execution. Others warned that killing her would make her immortal. Rome had learned that lesson before. And presiding over all of it stood Aurelian. He was not cruel by nature. He believed in order, in unity, in closing wounds by force if necessary. Zenobia unsettled him because she reflected something Rome preferred to deny, that authority could exist outside its permission. In the end, Aurelian chose spectacle, the triumph. It was Rome's oldest language of dominance, a ritual meant to crush memory under celebration. Conquered kings marched in chains, spoils rolled through the streets. The people cheered as if history itself were being rewritten in real time. Zenobia was dressed in gold for the procession. Heavy jewelry weighed down her neck and wrists, so heavy that later accounts claimed she struggled to walk beneath it. Whether that was truth or propaganda mattered less than the image Rome wanted. The East subdued, resistance humiliated, the queen reduced to ornament. But something went wrong. The crowd did not jeer. They stared, some in silence, some in awe, because Zenobia did not look broken. She held her head high. She did not avert her gaze. She walked through Rome as if measuring it, stone by stone, like a city she might have ruled under different circumstances. The triumph was supposed to end her story. Instead, it complicated it. Rome expected hatred. What it received was fascination. After the procession, Zenobia did not disappear into an execution chamber. Aurelian spared her life. Some sources claim he granted her a villa in Tibur. Others suggest she lived quietly under supervision, fading into obscurity. Rome wanted her alive, but irrelevant. And yet erasure is rarely complete. Palmyra was gone, its streets emptied, its temples shattered. But Zenobia's name traveled through merchants, through soldiers, through historians who could not quite agree on whether she was villain or hero. Rome tried to frame her as a cautionary tale. Time reframed her as something else entirely. A woman who ruled without permission, a queen who did not beg, a rival Rome could defeat but never fully explain. If you've stayed with this story this far, stay just a little longer, because legacy is not decided in chains or triumphs, it is decided afterward. And Zenobia's legacy was only beginning to slip beyond Rome's control, into memory, myth, and the quiet places where empires cannot reach, because the sand remembers, and it does not belong to Rome.
Rome destroyed Palmyra to erase a warning. But warnings don't die that easily. Long after the smoke cleared and the desert reclaimed its stones, the name Zenobia refused to vanish. Rome tried to soften her into a curiosity, a defeated queen who knew her place in the end. Yet memory has a way of slipping past borders, especially when power fears it. She lived. That alone unsettled the empire. In villas outside Rome, Zenobia became something Rome did not know how to classify. Not a prisoner, not an ally, not a corpse. She studied, debated, walked among Roman elites who spoke of philosophy and law as if conquest were abstract.
Some accounts say she married a Roman senator. Others insist she lived quietly, teaching her children Greek and Latin, watching the empire she challenged from a distance. Rome preferred those versions. They sounded safe. But elsewhere, the story changed. In the East, Zenobia became memory sharpened into myth. Traders whispered her name along caravan routes. Poets reshaped her defiance into legend. She was no longer merely a queen. She was proof that Rome could be resisted, even briefly. That terrified the empire more than armies ever had. Rome thrived on inevitability, on the idea that resistance was futile, temporary, doomed. Zenobia disrupted that story. She showed that Rome's grip could loosen, that a woman from the desert could command loyalty, territory, and fear. Even Roman historians betrayed their unease. They could not stop writing about her. They mocked her ambition, questioned her legitimacy, attacked her character, but every insult kept her alive on the page. History rarely hates what it forgets. Centuries passed, empires shifted, Rome fractured, reformed, and finally collapsed under its own weight. Palmyra remained ruins beneath an unforgiving sun, and Zenobia, no longer flesh and bone, outlived them all. She resurfaced in Renaissance texts as a noble rebel, in Enlightenment writings as a philosopher queen, in modern history as a symbol of resistance erased by empire. Every age reshaped her, but none could dismiss her. That is the quiet power Rome failed to understand. You can destroy cities, you can rewrite records, you can parade enemies in chains, but you cannot fully control what people remember. If this story resonates, if voices buried by power matter to you, this is where staying connected to them matters most. Zenobia's greatest victory was not her empire, it was her afterlife. Because Rome wanted her gone, history refused, and in the final reckoning, empires are measured not by how loudly they conquer, but by who still speaks when they're gone. The desert still whispers her name, and the last word on Zenobia was never Rome's to write.
Empires like to believe the end of a story is theirs to decide. Rome believed it had finished Zenobia. Her city lay broken, her banners burned, her body removed from the desert that had given her power. By every imperial measure, the problem was solved, order restored, history corrected. But the desert does not agree with empires. Long after Rome's legions withdrew, the sands around Palmyra shifted and settled, covering wounds without healing them. Columns lay snapped like bones, streets emptied, silence moved in. And in that silence, something stubborn remained. Not a city, not an army, but a memory that refused to stay buried. Zenobia had ruled for only a handful of years. Rome ruled for centuries. Yet it is her name that still interrupts the narrative Rome tried to leave behind. Why? Because she exposed a fault line. Rome's power was built on certainty, the certainty that it alone defined civilization, authority, legitimacy. Zenobia challenged that without theatrics. She did not scream rebellion. She governed, she negotiated, she administered justice. She built an empire, not by rejecting Rome's systems, but by mastering them better than Rome expected her to.
That is why Rome feared her more than invaders. She did not look like the enemy Rome understood. After her death, quiet, undocumented, intentionally unremarkable, Rome stopped speaking of her whenever it could. No cult of memory, no official mourning, just absence. But absence is not erasure, it is an invitation. Centuries later, scholars would ask why Rome worked so hard to diminish her, why sources contradicted themselves, why a failed rebel required so much explanation. And in those questions, Zenobia returned, less as a queen, more as an idea that power is not inherited, that legitimacy can come from competence, that even the largest empires are vulnerable to clarity of purpose. Palmyra never rose again. Zenobia never reclaimed a throne. This is not a story of victory in the conventional sense. It is something rarer and more unsettling. It is the story of someone who forced an empire to reveal its fear. Rome destroyed Palmyra because it could not allow an alternative to exist, not just politically, but symbolically. And in doing so, it confessed its weakness. Empires that are truly unchallenged do not need to annihilate memory. Zenobia did not survive Rome, but she outlived it. Today, her ruins still stand against the Syrian sky, scarred, weathered, unconquered by time. And when the wind moves through those broken columns, it carries a reminder that power leaves monuments, but resistance leaves echoes. Rome wanted a lesson. History delivered a warning. That authority without justice fractures, that control without consent decays, and that some names, once spoken by the desert, cannot be silenced. The sand kept Zenobia, and long after empires fall, it still remembers who dared to stand.